Well, hello, everybody. I want to offer a very warm welcome to Dave Beatty and Bob Davis in the flush of victory, getting their wonderful documentary, hour and 17 minutes long, Consciousness Connection on Gaia TV. It's airing right now. And if you have Gaia, if you are a Gaia subscriber, be sure to watch it. It's just beautiful. And in fact, the mind mirror is featured in it. And a little later in this program, Dave is going to show a clip of the mind mirror section of it. I know that you guys are excited about that, but this is not your first rodeo, is it? You've been working in film and you're both writers and authors and just have a wonderful background in communications. And I thought we would start out just by asking you one at a time to share with us how you came to this stage of looking into exploring and really promoting the concept that consciousness is fundamental, which is how your documentary started out. Can you start, Dave?
Sure, yeah. I think that for me, growing up in upstate New York, I was exposed to a lot of expanded consciousness information from my mother, who was very interested in this topic arena. And some of the first things she expressed to me was that there was another author in town by the name of Jane Roberts. And Jane, in the late 60s and early 70s, was one of the foremost parapsychological researchers that was using channeled material in her writing. And she and her husband, Rob, became very famous for the Seth material. And my mother was sharing that freely with me as a teenager. And I just ate that stuff up. The lessons of the why we're here on this planet and talking about our souls and talking about oversouls and consciousness emerging into a physical matter reality just blew my mind back then. And so forever I've had this interest in, why isn't science looking at this material? Why so much of it was given to us? When Bob contacted me, I don't know, 4 years ago or something about this, saying that he had written a new book and he wanted to turn it into a documentary film. And so when he described the topics, I was really intrigued. And so I said, how much money do you have? And he said, what do you mean? I go, Bob, you can't make a documentary film with no money. So I didn't know that. I said, whatever. I'm joking there. But so that was the beginning of it. And we decided that we were just going to do it anyways, somehow. And that was the beginning of this journey that we took. Because we were self-funded, we had to reach pretty deep into our own pockets to make it happen. But it seemed like doors opened everywhere we went. And a lot of it was Bob because of his connections in this field of expanded consciousness. He knows a lot of people, thankfully. So that's my story,
That's
Bob.
fantastic. That's wonderful about your mother exposing you to the Seth materials at such a young age and quite unusual for 20, 30 years ago. Nowadays, maybe more, but yeah, so that gave you a very curious mind about the unseen. And I wonder how you explored that before you got that call from Bob.
Yeah, I think the way that I did it was I was exposed to that material and also the Carlos Castaneda teachings of Don Juan material. So as a young man, I was comparing and contrasting this material. And because there's so many volumes in these authors' works, over the course of probably 20 years, I had to read them several times. And I still do enjoy going back and reading that material and thinking about what there's some of it's controversial, but looking at it and trying to think, how does that apply to the experiences I've had in my life? Could some of this non-physical, multidimensional influence be taking place that we are forming our own realities, that the reasons why we are here, what are those personal insights that each of us have that we can discover, and then maybe look beyond the veil to try to understand, is there something that is much more profound that is taking place that we don't remember because it's part of our spiritual whole that is not observed while we're on the planet Earth in waking reality. And it's still like a mystery that fascinates me, and I still want to know the answer. I think that we all scratched the surface of that. So that's me. That's what led me to do a film like we're talking about.
Yes, and I would assume that search, the desire, the emotion behind that desire, the yearning for answers, all of that had everything to do with your ending up making a conscious connection with Bob. And also, you have a book out that deals with coincidences too, right?
That's right. Yes. My mother was a maverick educator in the 1950s and 1960s in the field of early childhood education. She was one of the first academics that began promoting this idea that preschool children have the basically have the extraordinary ability to learn and absorb information. And in those formative months and years, we as parents can and teachers can take advantage of that. So she began promoting these really, at the time, radical ideas about developing courses for preschool, and she began writing textbooks in that field and became probably the nation's leading academic of observing development in young children. And she wrote like dozens and dozens of textbooks, many of which are in their 10th or more editions that are used at colleges and universities around the world. And so I decided to write a book about her life because it's much more than just that. And she had a really fascinating life that has a lot of mysteries and a lot of events that happen that are very puzzling and leave you scratching your head thinking, how could that possibly be emerge? It makes you smile and cry and the whole thing. So that the story is coincidental in itself. For instance, I was born on the island of Guam in the Western Pacific in 1965. So I never thought I would get back there because Guam is such a difficult place to get to. For instance, it's 8 hours west of Hawaii, for instance. So you know how far Hawaii is. Once you get to Hawaii, then you have a whole nother 8 hour flight to get to Guam. I didn't think I'd ever get back there, but I just randomly in my career was assigned to a story to go back to Guam. And on that flight back to Guam, my mother had passed that year, and I had her manuscript, and I was reading her manuscript about her life in Guam and why she went there in the 1950s. And I was carrying her ashes with me. And while I was on the island, I found my father's grave because he had passed away in 68 on Guam. And so it was just this whole like crazy thing. And this book that I did is that story. It's really incredible.
You want to show us the cover of that book?
Sure. Yeah. I self-published this on Amazon, and it's called My Coincidental Life by David Beatty and Dr. Janice Beatty Jansen. So this is on Amazon. Right now, I'm working on an Audible version of this for people that are sight impaired or people that just like the audiobooks. And I'm hoping to have that up on Audible within the month or so. Yep.
And I know that you're a rock musician because we talked about this previously, and we see the piano right there in the room with you. And you were with a rock band for 5 years. And how did you segue into becoming a filmmaker?
At a young age, I was always interested in electronic music. I got my hands in high school on a Moog synthesizer, and I was fascinated. It just hooked me immediately. Being able to create sound, sonic landscapes out of electronic circuits. So I focused on that in my undergraduate work, where I was combining electronic music, computer technology, video, and at the time, the emerging digital computers that were being able to do rudimentary graphics in the mid 80s. And then, of course, the Apple Macintoshes came out that allowed more and more of that. So transitioning out of college to try to figure out how I could use this, I was a television journalist for about 10 years because doing video is a challenging career, but television broadcast is always a way that you can merge into that. So that's what I did. I was a photojournalist, video journalist for all that time. And that led me into teleproduction. So the next iteration of my career, because I wasn't necessarily that into the journalism profession. I was more into the technology and the camera systems and so on. And so that led me into video production, filming, editing, sound processing, and had a wonderful career of nearly 30 years doing national films that have aired on the Travel Channel and History Channel and public television. Been all over the world doing that. So that's my story.
You had quite a few historical films that are in your vita. And is that a particular interest of yours, or was that just what happened to come your way?
Do we manifest thing? I was always a history buff, and I really would go to a bookstore and I would gravitate to the world history section, and military history fascinated me. So I would always have these books I'd be reading about a memoir of a soldier and so on. And I learned a lot about military history that way. I was approached by a former colleague that had a foundation called the World War II Foundation. It's his website's www.foundation.org. He's done over 40 films that have aired nationally on public television and internationally on every aspect of World War II. He's just really fascinated with that era in history, a big super nerd on that. So he invited me to begin working with him doing these films. So I've done probably about 10 films with, his name is Tim Gray. I've probably done about 10 films with him. And we continue to produce one or two of these hour-long PBS documentaries each year. The one that's currently on public television is called Peleliu, World War II's most well-preserved battlefield. We went there, actually. One of the reasons we went to Guam was to go to this specific battlefield and tell the stories of what's there today, which is a untouched battlefield from nearly 80 years ago. I just delivered a film on Guam, the history of Guam in World War II. And I get chills right now thinking about that because my mom was influenced by that in her early life in the early 1950s when she first came there, which was just after the war, as a teacher. And she would tell us about that era, the 2.5 years that the Japanese occupied Guam. They invaded Guam on the same day that Pearl Harbor was attacked. Not a lot of Americans knew where Guam was, but at the time, people knew that Guam was invaded. At the time, it was an American naval base, and we had approximately 200 or 300 Marines and Navy personnel on Guam. It was attacked and invaded. So I just finished the film, and that's going to be airing around the country, around the United States this May, in June, probably on PBS stations all over the country.
Well, that's wonderful. I expect that a historical film like that would be full of newsreels and clips and things like that. But Consciousness Connection is just a feast of visual beauty. It's absolutely gorgeous. Of course, everything's full color. And right up at the front, you have groups of people flying toward the earth and they're up in the air. So you did some AI work, and I would think that film would have allowed you a greater scope of creativity, did it?
Yes. So many times I think in our careers as artists or whatever your career is, we're working for other people and we have guardrails that we're following a prescribed path. with this film that Bob and I did, all of a sudden we had this freedom to pursue the direction of creativity that we felt the film deserved. And I think this is probably one of the first feature-length documentaries that I've ever done where I wasn't under the control of a producer that had paid for this. Because usually a sponsored program, you have other interests that are tied into it that control the narrative in some way. But in this case, Bob and I could pursue the creative aspects without that oversight. So it was really our vision. And in the visuals you're speaking of, and in the sound design and in the transitions, and even down to like how the interviews were filmed, the techniques of lighting and the camera systems, because I have a lot of experience doing this, I was able to do it effectively for not a lot of money, but still produce a visual integrity and creativity that I think stands right there with, say, films that have six-figure budgets and so on.
Honestly, it looked like it did.
Mm-hmm.
And I watch a lot of things on Gaia TV. It was right up there with what I'm sure are the high budget films. So congratulations on that. Just beautiful work. And
Thank you.
I was aware of the music, and of course I was aware of Bob Monroe being having a photo placed in AI and him turning around and speaking. So there were all sorts of creative tricks and techniques that you used in that film. And I'm sure that both of you worked on every minute aspect of it, Bob. It
Well,
was just amazing from the start. And it was
Dave
very
did
logical, you know?
Dave did the major work with the film.
Hmm.
He's the one that created it. I played my role trying to get the people together to be interviewed, but Dave and to some extent Wilson Hawthorne, our other co-producer, they created the film. They performed the magic with their professionalism, which I was blown away by. And the film, based on their expertise, is always in the top 10 with for Gaia TV productions. So it's getting a lot of clicks. A lot of people are viewing it, and it seems to be very competitive with their leading productions, which is nice to see.
No questions, the visuals, but also the content. And so this brings me to ask you, Bob, how did you conceive this idea and what in your background drew you towards such a really, I guess one would say the most important question of our time? Because I've been to seminars before and people are just gnawing on the question, what is consciousness? We can't pin it down. And so you really went for the key question of our time and just did a beautiful job of choosing who to interview. And the people who were interviewed were all very eloquent and knowledgeable. And it's just a beautiful production all along. So how did you, in your own personal development and your own background, come to conceive of this film?
You have a few hours?
Sure.
It's a long evolving process. I grew up in the streets of the South Bronx, which usually turns some heads. And I was fascinated at the time, back in the 60s, like most people, with the space race between us and the Soviet Union to first land and walk on the moon. So yeah, I'd always try to fake an illness to avoid school to watch the liftoff of the Mercury, the Gemini, and the Apollo astronauts lifting off from Cape Canaveral. You remember the black and white fuzzy TV screens that we used to have back then? But back then, the paranormal was popular. Uri Geller was bending spoons with his mind. Every household had a Ouija board. And stories about UAPs, like they are now, were routine in the 60s. But a decade later, I pursued doctoral studies in the neurosciences and led to a career as a professor and mainly as a researcher for over 4 decades. But that kind of training and career shaped a way of viewing the world where a traditional materialistic approach of the evidence had to be independently verified in order to be considered an acceptable theory. So I believed at the time that when we stop breathing and the brain ceases to function, consciousness is lost. There is no God, there's no ghosts. Consciousness, in other words, arose simply from a 3.5 pound spongy mass of fat and protein composed of billions of cells and neurons. And that was it. Nothing else was considered real unless science proved it using the scientific methods. I was pretty much a strict materialist, although I was, throughout those decades, a closet ufologist. I was always very much interested in that topic area, believing in it. But my perspective on consciousness really changed. I'm going to be very brief because Dave has heard me tell the story millions of times. I saw two orange orbs in the night sky in Sedona, Arizona. Couldn't explain it. Got more than my attention, but that led me to write my first book, The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe? The next type of evolving process that modified my perspective on consciousness occurred about 2 years later when I woke up from a horrific lucid dream where I felt I was suffocating to death. If you ask me, Bob, do you know what it's like to die? I can say, based on that lucid dream of suffocating, I say, yes, I do know what it's like. It was horrific. It was too hyper real of an experience. And during that time, I had a strong sense of knowingness that my colleague Anne, a very dear, close friend, had died. And I was shaken up by the entire dream, not really considering that knowingness of her death actually was real. But when I opened the door of my lab with the key, the teary-eyed faces of my colleagues hit me over the head. I knew right then and there that my dream was, in a sense, clairvoyant. And she had died at the time that I had that lucid dream. 2 years, and that led me to write the book Life After Death, an analysis of the evidence. So I was still evolving here, becoming more of a consciousness nerd. And the final blow, and probably isn't the final one, was a Kundalini awakening. My body was contorting in ways I can't explain. I can try to mimic it for the audience, but I'd look too foolish in doing so. But while I looked like Reagan in the movie The Exorcist, without the green pea soup, I felt bliss. So there was a real duality where my mind and body were truly independent. I couldn't control my body. And if you observed my body while I was going through this energetic awakening, you would think I was suffering and sobbing and crying in torture. But that was completely not the case. I was feeling nothing but sheer bliss at the time, and I didn't want it to stop. And I said to the woman who was inducing it to me, I said, come on, give me more, which is how good I felt from the experience. But that remarkable Kundalini awakening led me to write that third book, Unseen Forces, which I gave to Dave. And as Dave explained, that began the process of our film, which was a long 3 year plus process after we discussed the nature of our production in Punta Gorda, Florida, over a cheap meal. So we've been working hard, interviewing research scholars and experiencers, and Dave Beatty and Wilson Hawthorne, who another co-producer, collaborated with me towards developing our film, which is now streamed Gaia TV Productions. And the audience can go to consciousness.media in order to view it, or it's on Amazon Video as well. It can be observed. Collectively, these three, call them extraordinary human experiences, that was my fourth book, The Consciousness Connection, Extraordinary Human Experiences and the Nature of Reality. It's a book that was based on the documentary. It takes the reader through what we did in the production of the film, and delving into a variety of different topics, consciousness, of course, being just one. But the book contains a range of subject material, from consciousness, of course, to Kundalini awakenings, to mediumship, ESP, autistic savants, you name it, UAPs even. It took me time to fully integrate it. This awakening that I had was too energetic, and it wasn't easy the first year, especially. It created a great deal of anxiety in me, and I should have sought some professional assistance with my anxiety from that episode, but I didn't. And in hindsight, I should have. But those three events shifted my perspective out of the ego as me into something that's more real and natural in life. It's not, it's like I wasn't the center of the universe anymore. I was evolving around other more important matters in life. And I really do believe I was shifted in some respects in terms of consciousness, because now I believe that consciousness is primary. I'm not a materialist like I used to be, where the brain equals consciousness. Now I'm an idealist. Consciousness is primary, and mass and matter, energy, they're all derivatives of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is it's gonna always be hard because it'll never be found in the brain, and we don't know where in the brain it we where we encode our subjective experiences, the essence of I, the essence of our feelings, what it feels like to be me, the intense, deep emotional reaction that we have when we observe a beautiful, awe-inspiring event. We can't locate that in the brain. What we can do with the brain is tickle a little area, and I'll raise my hand, I'll raise a finger, I'll retrieve a memory, little things like that. But we have no clue about these aspects of subjective experience as it relates to physiological function.
Yeah, I like the way you opened the film with a quote from Max Planck, founder of quantum theory. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness.
Right.
Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing postulates consciousness. And from that, you took off with the theme of materialistic view of the brain and consciousness versus the idealistic view, and interviewed really the leading research organizations, including IONS Institute of Noetic Sciences, the Rhine Institute, the Monroe Institute, and other people ranging from psychologists and neuroscientists like Eben Alexander, just this parapsychologists, lots of different people. And you did a wonderfully in-depth job of explaining or showing who these organizations were, how they had come about, what were their goals, what they were doing in terms of research, and what was their viewpoint. And I thought that was really great because, of course, the Monroe Institute has been around since the 1970s, but not everyone really comprehends what they're about. And you had great interviews with Scooter, Joe McMoneagle's wife, Bob Monroe's stepdaughter, and Ellen Evans, the CEO of Monroe, and just did such a thorough job of that. And I really appreciate personally that this will bring the Monroe Institute programs to a wider audience through your film and its appearance on Gaia TV. And of course, I think a lot more people know about ions because of Edgar Mitchell, and not as many people, I think, don't know about the Rhine Institute. That was a wonderfully thorough treatment of Rhine, where John Kruth was speaking, and you had a lot of archival footage in there showing J.B. Rhine performing his first experiments. And all the while, you have this undercurrent message that's saying, this is real. Look, these things are real. And if you don't believe that we are unlimited and confine yourself to a materialistic worldview, there's a lot you're missing out on. And people who are watching Gaia might not get that, but if you've got this thing on Amazon Prime, that's a more mainstream audience. So that is really wonderful to hear. How did you decide who to include in this film?
Several of the people in the field I know personally as friends, and some I don't, but they were kind enough to assist me in meeting my need for them to be interviewed by us in the creation of the documentary. So it wasn't that difficult. It was more difficult trying to get into the Monroe Institute in order to film individuals there, both researchers like yourself, as well as experiencers, the general public who are not, who may not have been. Likewise with the Ryan Research Center and ions. I knew Dr. Edgar Mitchell, but that didn't get us into ions. I was just familiar with some of the experiments there, and I knew Helene Waba, the director, and Jeff Long, the near-death experiencer researcher, Bruce Grayson, Raymond Moody, who's not in the film. He lives actually right here in Sarasota. It's a wonderful individual. I had the pleasure of meeting him several times and learned a great deal from him. But it was an eclectic mix of individuals in various fields that involved physics to medicine, psychiatry, psychology, pure science, to Jeff Mishlove with a PhD in parapsychology and a wonderful interviewer for PBS, and who won the Bix essay contest. And Diane Hennessy Powell, the neuropsychiatrist who's developed the telepathy tapes that is gaining great popularity, virally speaking, where she shows ESP is real in autistic savants. We knew that many years ago, but she led the charge and she's now demonstrating that is the case. Autistic savants can indeed demonstrate extrasensory perception. Maybe we
Over
could talk
long
a little bit more.
distances, I think, right?
What's that?
Over long distances, right?
Distance is not an issue. That's
Yeah.
correct. That's correct. Space and time don't impede it. And what tipped her off was a 6-year-old who would solve the cube root numbers, the answers to cube roots to the third, fourth decimal point without a history in mathematics. And when Diane asked this 6-year-old kid, how is he able to do it? The kid said, it just pops in my head. And that popped something into her head, thinking that there's got to be another answer other than the brain that is responsible for this type of behavior. How can these young children have an accuracy of close to 100% on the Zenzer cards? You talked about the Ryan Research Center and the Zenzer cards, the 5 cards with different symbols on each. Random guessing would give you 20% correct. You do that with these autistic savant kids, and they're giving you 80 to 100% correct consistently. And Diane has proved that's in part in the telepathy tapes, among other things, proving conclusively and that ESP is valid. Aside from the thousands of experiments that have been independently verified already, proving that is the case, despite the materialist viewpoint that ESP isn't real. Although there's more evidence for it to be real than most evidence is to prove theories in science. That's how convincing the evidence is for extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. It's just not acknowledged by materialists because they can't explain it. Newtonian physics isn't designed to explain ESP, so you can't answer it, and you can't blame them. You really can't. We need a different paradigm shift to incorporate consciousness into the equation to help us explain the answer. That gives us the final piece to the puzzle as to why ESP exists, why Kundalini awakenings occur, why mediumship is real, among many other extraordinary human experiences that materialists regard as pseudoscience, but it is not. And I am convinced it is not. It is just a lack of education and interest on the part of the general scholars in science that are unwilling for professional reasons primarily, to pursue research in this area. And that's why it has limited funding and limited publications in the field, although it is gaining in acceptance slowly. The internet is partly responsible for that as people become more aware of the things we're talking about. There's also a lot of garbage out there. So people have to be very discriminating in what they regard as valid and not valid.
What was your goal, intention, desire for this film to accomplish? What did you want it to communicate to
A
people?
paradigm shift. A paradigm shift. This, they're few and far between. It occurs one funeral at a time. One funeral at a time, from the Darwinian evolutionary theory to Copernicus revolution to Galileo looking through his telescope, deciding that the Earth isn't the center of the universe. These things occur slowly, but we're now, I think, ready for another paradigm shift to incorporate consciousness actually into the equation, where we, in other words, look at the subjective experience that the person is having, the semantics of it, the thematic aspect of their experience, and how it contributes to their perspective and their experiences in this unearthly realm. So I think we need to better understand how materialists view consciousness, how idealists view consciousness, because there are 30 different definitions of consciousness, and nobody has the answer. And those that claim to have the answer, I would say that their ego is showing. So I'm not sure if that's addressing your question, which was what again?
No, just what you had hoped to accomplish.
Yeah, the paradigm shift. Incorporating consciousness into the materialist mindset and incorporating the subjective experience, combining it with the physical objective experience in order to create an integrated, holistic whole perspective of what is actually happening when an extraordinary event occurs. You can't just look at it quantitatively. You have to incorporate the qualitative evidence as well in order to answer the question, is this valid or not? And if you just look at the quantitative, which materialists do, you're only looking at part of the picture. They exclude the person, which is bad science, terrible science.
Yeah, subjective experience isn't considered relevant somehow.
That's
And,
right.
and in our work, subjective experience is the pathway to not only help people find landmarks that they can use to recreate a particular brainwave pattern, but for us as researchers to understand why people produce particular brainwave patterns and where the commonalities are in the circumstances or the thought patterns. And it's everything. Subjective experience is at least half, we think, of the equation.
Right.
There were some quotes right at the end of the film. Excuse me. I was delighted that I guess in the last 10 or 15 minutes, a number of people, you had clips from them saying in general that these are the obstacles to a general understanding that we are one mind with the brain serving as a filter, and that what we hope to do here is transform our collective understanding of consciousness, and then obstacles, and including the lack of funding. And then followed right by that was a lot of optimism toward, in the belief that we are moving toward a paradigm shift. And I think because of films like yours, and as you said, the internet, however, we have to winnow it to get the information, but also that every time a film like yours is aired, some researcher somewhere says, wait a minute, I didn't know that there was any scientific proof whatsoever of the validity of psychic experience. So this little worm in the brain starts to turn, and then maybe you have another researcher. So it's not just individuals, it's potentially propagating searchers, questioners, researchers, and that is incredibly valuable. Yeah. Anything we've said, Dave, that you want to comment on?
Unmute. Going into the film, obviously there was chapters that you have identified and observed there. One of the things that was a goal of mine from the very beginning was to present evidence that our consciousness exists beyond physical matter reality. And our consciousness, our soul, our essence of our being is eternally valid. And especially to an audience that may not have a lot of background in this topic area, it's a very heady topic, and I'm hoping that people will give it a chance to try to understand it. But the overarching message that I wanted to let people know is that we do survive bodily death. And this film was sort of a bedrock foundation, and we decided to give it the subtitle Foundations because we had to set this stage of what's come before, who were some of the leading experts, at least in the last generation or a couple generations, that were fighting their way to create an academic landscape that would accept this. And many people have religious experiences about the afterlife and the belief in that, but other people perhaps don't know what's going on with research into this, that it possibly could prove that consciousness is a multidimensional, non-physical, some type of field that is existing outside of our bodies, and that our consciousness can separate from our bodies and remain just as valid in that state as our kind of waking senses using our brain. So that was my ultimate goal, is to let people know that they come out of the film thinking, I'm not as scared of death. I'm not as grieving for the loved ones that I lost, because perhaps they are right here with us. Perhaps they are observing us from a perspective that allows them, and eventually ourselves, to observe us. And what's the prime directive? We're here in an environment of experiential events, and we can't necessarily know that, but maybe just a little glimmer of the fact that could be true. And if you come away thinking that of that, then you're like, okay, I start to understand that, as Bob Monroe says, that nothing can destroy the essence of you.
I thought that was very well elucidated by the segment on Candace Sanderson at Monroe, where perhaps with the help of some AI, you not only interviewed her, but then showed her in a check unit contacting some people who had recently passed. And she's such a great interview, because she was saying, I couldn't believe it that I was able to contact or have come into my mind an awareness of several people who had passed over, and then Googled it and actually found their obituaries. So she clearly had some kind of contact there. And as you say, it is so wonderfully reassuring to people to think that they're just a frequency or a few frequencies away. And also, I think you did a good job communicating that people who attain a degree of quiet in the mind through some sort of meditation technique, or say an isolation chamber, that these folks are better able to tune in, tap in to non ordinary information. I felt that the film was so comprehensive that you even managed to explain some of the techniques that, for example, in the Gansfield experiments, vastly with the eye cups on and then the isolation chamber, vastly increased the intuitive powers up, what was it, to 50% or something from 30% that J.B. Rhine was getting. And it was just to shut off the thinking mind, shut down the external awareness, and to thus make that connection. Now, I know that there was at least one exception, and that being Ed Edwards, who is with us here today. I don't know that Ed actually meditates before he starts his healing, but I thought that was one of the most powerful validations of energy healing that I've ever seen, because here he is in the biophoton lab at the Rhine Institute, and John Kruth is sitting there in front of the computer, and we're watching Ed in a quiet state producing 4 to 10 biophotons per, I think it's half second or something. And then John tells him to turn it on, and then there's this massive spike, and then the spikes continue, and then John says, okay, turn on your healing power so that it's a steady state. And sure enough, it's these close together spikes. And that is wonderfully convincing to people as well, that energy healing exists, it's real, it has a physical effect on the body, mind, heart, and spirit. And as Ed determinedly said, anyone can do it, and everyone ought to be doing it. And so that is just such a wonderful encouragement to the watchers of your program as well.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Judith, because you can make the case that human beings are light beings. You can mean that spiritually, oh, I'm a light being. But in actuality, we do produce light, micro volts of biophotons, light energy. They're produced by our cells and even the DNA. It's been measured, and people generate a couple every second or so on average, some a little bit more. But as you said, Ed Edwards is able to generate 20, 30, 40 times the quantity of biophotons, initiate it as well as impede it with his intention. And that is a good indication of consciousness and how you can control your body, mind over matter in the sense. And he claims to be able to move people with his mind and to heal people. And healing at a distance has been found to be real. It doesn't always happen in every single case, but there are enough cases, especially by William Bengston, who we'd like to get possibly in another documentary at some point in time, can actually reverse cancerous tumors induced in mice, adenocarcinomas, a fatal condition. And he says to me, Bob, I don't know how I do it, but I just wave my hand over the mouse that's infected with this cancer, and it automatically begins to reverse itself in terms of its healing properties to the point where in a few days you'd never know there was a massive tumor eroding the tissue. He has no clue, but this is real. And I know some scientists who have worked with him and can contend to me that there is definitely something real about this.
Yes,
So,
and Ed Edwards is commenting in chat that he is not the source of the energy any more than probably Bill Bingston is, but rather is a conduit.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
That
Good point.
that
Yeah, Ed, like in the film, he says that he likes to blow the soot out of your operating system and
That's
activate
right.
your own healing power.
That's right.
yeah, yeah. And it occurred to me while I was just watching the film for the second time before this get together, that the biophotons are in the brain too. And maybe this, what I'm about to say, is a little intro to, and where Dave can show the mind mirror portion of the film. Thought is energy, is light. When it connects to a human person, comes in, goes out, assimilates, whatever, it's biophotons. And I think that's what I'm sure that's what we're watching in the mind mirror display. We're going to look at your brainwave patterns, Bob and Dave, in a few minutes. And there's a perfect explanation for everything we're seeing on the mind mirror window in your very advanced patterns. And we're just delighted that you have featured the mind mirror in this video. And it's my hope, of course, that people will understand what an incredibly accurate device the mind mirror is. You're talking about what is consciousness. My perception of what we're seeing on the mind mirror is that, yes, the brain is the filter. That is where the electrical activity is happening, but it's also happening on a higher level. And because it's filtering down through the brain onto the mind mirror screen from that higher level, we're actually looking at people's relationship, personal relationship to the field itself, which is why we see so much extraordinary activity in high gamma and super low delta. We're looking at people's connection with the field. And I don't know of anything else that can do that, can portray your connection to universal consciousness. And hopefully when we look at your brainwave patterns in a few moments, I'll be able to say a bit more that makes better sense about that. Dave, do you want to roll them?
Yeah, sure.
I won't say Katrinka. Most people don't know what that means.
Set this up. Bob and I spent some time at Monroe where we were introduced to Judith Pennington and the Mind Mirror. And we were fortunate enough to be able to film 3 participants in a workshop that was happening at Monroe that was focusing specifically on energy healing. And one of the teachers is a trauma surgeon, and actually there were several MDs basically that were participating in this that Judith was able to conduct mind mirror readings on. So this section of the film discusses a little bit about the history, but then it goes to a modern day program that Bob and I were able to film. So you'll see a little of that. And then at the end, I just clipped in a portion where Dr. Davis and I were invited to do some meditating with the mind mirror. So let me play that for you.
The mind mirror is an EEG, or electroencephalogram system that measures brainwaves.
C. Maxwell Cade was a biophysicist in London, based in London, who was also a Zen master, a meditation master, and a master hypnotist.
In 1976, he invented a new type of EEG.
Unlike any other EEG, it measures the left and the right side of the brain. Everyone experiences all of the states of consciousness associated with different brainwave category amplifications all the time.
In the Monroe lab, researcher Judith Pennington fits participants with wired leads to measure brainwaves. Sometimes she uses binaural beat sounds. Each brainwave pattern is measured.
So when you lower your frequencies, when they get slower, then your thoughts are slowed into different levels and kinds of perception. So when you're in alpha, you're daydreamy, detached, diffused thinking, relaxed thinking.
Out-of-body experiences are often associated with the brainwave pattern of alpha waves, overlaid with theta waves.
And in fact, awakened mind meditation is like putting people in touch with a waking dream. You're down here where you see alpha is usually dominant in the pattern. But Brian was an absolute anomaly for us, but I did not expect to see an almost 100 hertz circular evolved mind pattern of universal consciousness, which is the highest known pattern on the mind mirror, because now we're measuring not just at 44 hertz, but up to 100 hertz that have to do with transcendence, love, compassion, the patterns that we see in extremely advanced people. All right, so this is our eyes open session.
Lauren Belg practices visualization exercises with the mind mirror. She is an intensive care doctor and is interested in her own self-evolution and discovery.
And she is up in it's the second most profound pattern that exists. So Brian is almost at that 100 hertz universal consciousness. She is at super conscious level on the 100 hertz scale, which is phenomenal. When you closed your eyes, beautiful awakened mind pattern, but with some gamma. You could see some gamma up at the top of it. It's better if I just show it to you in the air.
I just followed her cues and was really surprised by what the brainwaves showed. I've never had that opportunity. I've always entered meditative states just by feel and how I am perceiving meditative states. So it was really illuminating.
So this is our little clip here at the end that Bob and I are sitting there at Monroe with Judith analyzing our brainwave patterns. So I'm going to pause it here.
A couple of interesting comments to make about what we just saw. One is that Brian Daly, who with Alan Evans, the CEO of Monroe, teaches or taught an energy medicine course, Brian was just sitting there hooked up across from me, and we didn't really have any plan. It was just to measure his brainwaves. And about, 20 minutes into it, all of a sudden I felt this wash of very powerful energy and just vibrating all around me. And I felt it in my arms, my legs, my feet. It was just such a sudden change, and it was sustained. So it wasn't like a chill or something that just passed. And afterwards I said, "What were you doing?" He said, "I was sending you healing energy." And that's when he formed those universal consciousness patterns, connection with his source, with the addition of all those gamma waves. And then Lauren Belg, who is the intensive care physician, for her, for some reason, I guess by then I'd figured out I needed a plan. And so we broke her session into several segments, on eyes open and eyes closed. What's your meditation practice look like? Let's look at that. And then what are you like when you're working in intensive care? And sure enough, the same meditation brainwave pattern, a superconscious mind with gamma over an awakened mind pattern, showed up in her silent meditation as in her imaging, being in the intensive care unit and working with people. So you saw really her love and her super consciousness, how wonderful she must be with her patients. And then for the last segment, I said, just expand out into the universe. I gave her, I don't remember specifically what was the thing I asked her to do, but she almost went into a near-death experience where she kept going up and farther away from herself and was starting to lose consciousness. And she started going into some universal consciousness patterns herself. I was just utterly astonished. I'm just trying to flip through here and see if I can put my hands on her. Yeah, here it is. So the last one, I said to merge consciousness with words, merge. Yeah, I just told her to merge in whatever way she felt like. And she just really started to disappear and came back, and took her how it looks when somebody's so deep where their consciousness is looking back into themselves and they don't come back for a while. And she said, I don't know where I was. That was so strange. And sure enough, she was showing those universal consciousness patterns, that merging pattern. Alan called me and said, come and do some brainwave patterns for some people we're inviting to Monroe. And I said, it's going to work out because I can stop there and spend the night on my way to Pensacola, Florida. I had a kind of upsetting thing I had to do in Pensacola. And then I was going on to Baton Rouge for a short vacation. So I had nothing but beach clothing with me. And I didn't take the whole thing seriously. When you guys 3 years later came out with this film, I went, what? This thing, they actually pulled this thing off. I was just so thrilled for you. And before I show your brainwave patterns, I just have one more question. How did you pull it off? How did you get it to the attention of Gaia TV, who I'm sure is solicited by every filmmaker in existence, literally all over the world? What was your journey to complete the film and get it broadcast?
I'll throw one out there. We got an email from Gaia TV saying that they wanted our film. So we never reached out to Gaia. I'm certainly not sure of how the president of Gaia became aware of the film. I'm going to hand that to Bob, because probably he saw Bob on a podcast discussing it, which Bob did dedicate a lot of his time to discussing the film in the last several years. Whenever he had an opportunity, he would plug it. And we had a GoFundMe going that was our travel fund. And that was really the only sponsor we had, was a group of individuals that believed in us and saw a shared vision and mission. So they donated whatever they could to us. And then we would plan a way to go out and film, airfare and that sort of thing, hotels and cars. And when Gaia reached out to us, that was just off the wall. Isn't that what happened, Bob?
Yeah, it was. I'm not exactly sure how Gaia got attuned to us. I tend to think the president may have heard me give an interview on Buddha at the Gas Pump with Rick Archer, a very popular podcast with a very large subscriber base. And I enjoyed doing that interview, and I talked a great deal about the film because shortly after that, Gaia came on board. It doesn't mean that interview turned him on. He could have heard Dave, who's also doing many podcasts, or could have gone on our Facebook page. The Consciousness Connection Group is a Facebook page that we administer also, talking about our film. So it's hard to know exactly how he got word of us, but the main thing is that he did, and hopefully they will accept our next film in the docuseries that we are planning to produce over the next few years.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about that. And Ed Edwards wants to know, when did Gaia contact you?
That was a little over 2 months ago, maybe no more than that, Dave.
This is what happens to your
signed the contract about 4 months ago, thereabouts, and they released it early February, a month earlier than we had anticipated, and now it's been in their top 10, vacillating between number 3 and number 7 in terms of viewership. When you click on it, that's a point. So we've been fluctuating with it within the top 10, which I think is very good.
Make sure you give us a thumbs up.
That's fantastic. And sounds like destiny to me. You just totally manifested this. Yeah.
That's how a lot of this happened. When I think back about some of the interviews that we got Ions wasn't necessarily interested in having a film crew come out. A lot of these groups hadn't had pleasant experiences with film crews making documentaries because sometimes the producers weren't necessarily that educated on the topic and took it with a lot of tongue-in-cheek aspects or getting information wrong and so on. So in a lot of cases for the scientific researchers that are fighting for funding, having that done isn't a benefit to them at all. It's just the opposite. So the fact that they trusted us and when they talked to us, we tried to explain what we were doing and letting them know that we're trying to present this material in a very even keel, unbiased way that's not going to harm your funding sources or make it look that way as a woo type thing. And perhaps it will do just the opposite. So that may have had something to do with it.
Could be. And also Ed Edwards says that when he was being filled last year, I think by Sid Goldberg, who did the Divine Science program, he told them all about you last year. Yeah. So whatever brought it about, I'm so excited for you and really appreciate
Thank you.
everything you did to make it happen. All right, so I'm going to go ahead now and share these brainwave patterns, which are most excellent and quite fun to watch. Bob is here on the left and Dave is here on the right. And I don't even much remember what was this about. Was it that you were listening to one of the Monroe sound science recordings with the gamma beats in it?
Yeah, that's right. I think I didn't know all of the audio files they had, but it was one of their Focus 10, I think, recordings that they left up for us to utilize.
Okay. It seemed to have lovely effects for you both. Bob later said during feedback that he felt waves of energy and at times his mind drifted, but he kept going back to the music and he liked the high-pitched strings. They gave him a charge and his mind went toward his leg. I'm not sure why that was. Do you remember, Bob?
My mind went towards my leg.
Yeah, that's what you said. Yeah.
I have restless leg syndrome.
Ah.
So I think my leg was bothering me. When I'm in a quiet position, I get these weird sensations. So maybe that was it.
Okay. There's a little bit of noise in here. We were in the control room where there's tons of equipment, and that is no doubt the cause of this 60 hertz noise here. But 60 hertz does not travel below 30 hertz. So this low gamma that you're seeing here is real. And I suspect that this has something to do with this Kundalini experience that you had, Bob. You see all this high amplitude
Yes.
gamma here in the left brain, and it got even stronger. You had in fact, at the time, you connected that with feeling the waves of energy. By 5:53 minutes, it was even stronger and more alpha. And you were also, the alpha was strengthening, and then your alpha dropped down, you can see right here, to this 9 hertz peak, which means that you were going deeper into meditation. And henceforth, we're going to see more amplitude in your theta in here. See more amplitude in the theta frequencies. And when that
I meditate all the time. Would that have an impact on these readings?
You bet. Absolutely. So if I just scroll us back to this pattern, say this is good enough in here. So what we have here is a superconscious gamma synchrony pattern with amplitudes in the left and the right brain going up to 100 hertz and a very strong alpha bridge and some strong subconscious theta activity here in the 7.5 hertz bar. So that is a meditation pattern. but it's also a pattern of transcendence where you're connecting with something greater than, whether that's your essence or your soul, higher self, whatever it could be. And this deep connection increases as this goes on, as it would for a regular meditator. But interestingly, you are holding on to the gamma, which is what makes it a superconscious pattern. This is at about 15 minutes, and you'll start to see this big subconscious mind and also the delta increasing. See, the alpha is greatly increased. I can scroll out a little bit so you can see that alpha better. But look at this massive gamma here. So as you went deeper, which sometimes happens, the amplitudes of theta and delta increasing can stimulate gamma, but your gamma was already stimulated. So now we're moving into more profound patterns here. You have very close to an evolved mind of unity consciousness pattern here in the right brain, and in both the left and right. You see this amplification of this 7.5 hertz bar of subconscious theta. This is because you have this, your alpha peak has dropped down to 9 hertz, and you're moving toward what's called an alpha theta crossover, where this becomes then a transpersonal pattern. You're not so much in the human self anymore. And that kept developing until around 19 minutes, where I saw last night a full diamond pattern of the higher self.
Human resonance.
Yes. And there was some resonance between the two of you. I'm going to show that. All right, beautiful. Did you see that pattern that passed so fast there? Just stunning pattern. More of this alpha theta crossover, more of this rounding, and more of this movement toward this evolved mind, but in both sides of the brain. There it is. So, yeah. So
looks symmetric.
Yes, and oneness with source. So you've gone down, which decreased the gamma, which I'm sure is related to Kundalini, because Kundalini and gamma are two sides of the same coin.
That's true.
And just forming these lovely patterns right here at 1907, which turned into a full diamond of the higher self at 1932. So I'm just going to scroll over there to show you that pattern, which is rare. It's very rare. Some people form this diamond-shaped pattern at the top, some people at the bottom. You see you're moving toward it already because of this 7.5 hertz activity. I saw it a lot in Ed Edwards while he was healing me at the Rhine Center. Here it is. Isn't that a beautiful pattern? On both sides. We've still got more gamma over here, but a diamond pattern of the higher self.
So it means I'm not crazy.
It means you're not only not crazy, that everybody would like to be like you.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's a powerful pattern there.
Is it? Yeah, appreciate it.
It says that you have elevated your consciousness beyond the human self into connection, a conscious connection with the divine. So you're almost at the full circle. Now, we've seen full circles for you before, but this is really nice because this is saying, as other people say, the few others that I've seen have a whole diamond, say that I just felt like a higher version of myself. I didn't feel like my human self anymore. And on it went. It was the apex of your patterns. So let's go on now to Dave's patterns, which start out, to my surprise, at 3:27 minutes. I'll scroll over there. All right, well, we'll start at the beginning. There it is. You showed an evolved mind pattern on the right, And this is 21 seconds into the session. The rounding of the evolved mind here even earlier. Movement not quite finished up at the top, but certainly at the bottom and on the sides of this evolved mind of unity consciousness. The record that we've seen so far is someone dropping into an awakened mind within 10 or 20 seconds. But this is a much more advanced pattern, this evolved mind is. It's an extraordinary pattern. It says that you're completely connected with your source and you've surrendered the ego to that source. And it's a gollywomper. Same thing over here. You maintain this pattern. Let me just resume it so you can watch. What amazed me, not just the patterns you formed themselves, but this unbelievably stable alpha. Here's your musician, your concentrating filmmaker with this alpha. It's like a tuner for the brain. It's quite expanded, 40 microvolts, 50 microvolts. It's by far the dominant feature in your brainwave pattern, as it is for everyone, because we're measuring on the back of the head. But you don't see these kinds of amplitudes very often. And especially what's really nice is that if you had that kind of alpha and no theta, then we would have said you're a daydreamer. But instead, you were able to drop down into this low and slow theta subconscious and into delta. So you can see high amplitudes of delta too, plus this upturn delta, which is a signal that energy and information are traveling either from your unconscious mind or from the universal consciousness field into these quiet, slow frequencies up. You see how that's more expanded, still more expanding. So that's what forms that pattern, is energy and information traveling up across the alpha bridge and into conscious awareness. So I want to show you something I thought was really cool. About 14 minutes in, it looked to me like you two were tracking each other. Was this where we saw your gamma come up? No, not quite. But at 14:14, you had very similar brainwave patterns. And even to the extent of having this alpha theta crossover thing happening with the 7.5 hertz. This is depth. This is going way deep down inside yourself. But still, not many people have that diamond shape that's formed by that extended 7.5 hertz. And then here's Dave going into the same thing. Now, this, of course, might be from your own meditation practice, Dave. And I should ask, do you meditate? Bob admitted that he does. Do you have a regular meditation practice, Dave?
I do meditate, but it's not something that I'm doing every day.
Yeah, so
I'm more of a beginner.
And in a very real way, you're meditating every time you do creative work.
Yes.
Because focused awareness and sustained attention, that is meditation. The best meditators are developing exactly that which you are developing through your music and your film work. And so a big evolved mind flare here.
And you see his unique creativity features in any of this?
Absolutely. This whole bottom half is him contacting the creativity, insight, intuition, and spiritual of theta in these blue frequencies here. That's exactly what we're looking at. We looked at it in you too. And now here, Dave, you've got a beautiful diamond right here on a delta platform. Look at this. So this is a higher soft pattern. And honestly, we don't see this very often. I saw it in Ed Edwards when he was doing energy healing on me, and all you guys are doing is sitting here listening to the meditation. So it just goes on with this super strong alpha nonstop. and similarities in the brainwave patterns. Let's just watch that for a few moments.
He has more evolved gamma, is that right?
He does. Until later on in the session, and you start to develop the gamma. So this field resonance thing is very real. Now, it's true that there were probably some gamma beats in the recording you were listening to. So pretty soon at 2050, we're going to see some gamma in right brain gamma for you, some left, but also some right. So the key is to look at the amplitudes of gamma right now and then watch the change.
My gamma amplitudes are fairly large.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. All right, now look at the similarities in the brainwave patterns. Ed's and my brainwave patterns, while he was healing me at Rhine, did the same thing. Started to track. I had no gamma at the start, and he gave me some gamma, and I was wonderfully healed immediately after, and I'd been working. There we go. Look at this gamma here. So all of a sudden it crops up. I'd been working nonstop for weeks and traveling, and Ed gave me a healing during which I had some really powerful visuals of spiritual import and meaning to me. And I went back home and hopped on a plane for China. And I was halfway through the week when I thought, wow, I'm not tired and I don't have any jet lag. It had to have been Ed Edwards, because otherwise I was falling down exhausted when I got to Rhine, and when I left, I was super tired. So you see, there's still more, even after a minute later, there's still a residual gamma up here.
It almost looked like what's the beta? Is that the one down below? That one contracted. What's the one in the bottom? That's the theta, and
the delta.
Those contracted and the gamma expanded.
And that's exactly, you put your finger with your movie maker's eye on something very important. And it's that as gamma expands, there is typically less theta, because now the concentration of consciousness has moved into the higher frequencies. But cool, look at Bob over here having both. You still got this mega, and you also have a lot of theta. Look at it. Superconscious pattern. So in case this is of some help to you, Bob, what we're seeing in Dave's brainwaves is a very grounded, awakened mind pattern, grounded in the low and slow frequencies with a highly amplified alpha, which is also very grounding for him. While you have, Bob, a strong and steady alpha, if you were to, keep these frequencies turned on more often in waking life, any residual nervousness from that Kundalini arousal would ground in these low frequencies. We see this commonly among people who've had Kundalini arousal.
Really?
And have a lot of gamma, because gamma's the brain running as fast as the whole body, as nervous system is running. But once it's grounded, that's a grand pattern right there. Look at that thing. You're really moving toward that same pattern we saw in Brian Daly, that universal consciousness pattern. So I'm not surprised that you two are compatible, because it did look to me like in two places your brainwaves were starting to synchronize, and especially this gamma handoff from Bob to Dave that we just watched.
That's why we make such a unique team.
There you go. Exactly that. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I hope that this type of research becomes more widely accepted and accessible to people to provide feedback to them. And I know that has happened with Mind Mirror, and people are becoming more interested in this type of research for usage in their own life.
Yeah, I hope so. We wish that we could develop a mind mirror that is mainstream and affordable to more people. We've been working on it for years, but you saw how we did your hookup having to separate hair and go into the scalp. That's really
Mm.
what slowed us down. We're still working on it though, and fully expect to accomplish it at some point. And then the mind mirror will have more top of the mind recognition.
And you ever find negative patterns?
Oh gosh, yes. In fact, the Institute for the Awakened Mind, which developed out of the mind mirror technology and teaches people how to awaken their awareness and develop exactly the same brainwave patterns we saw in the two of you, that whole I am exists to help people through either the self-training program in the mind mirror and or our library of guided meditations to get to those states. Because most people, the ordinary consciousness brainwave pattern is splayed beta thinking mind, completely externally focused. And then they'll have the delta radar turned on to watch their backs through hypervigilance, and no alpha and no theta. And without that alpha, there's no access to the creativity, insight, and intuition in theta. So we have a world of people who are not anywhere near achieving their extraordinary potential. And it's not that hard to do. The mind mirror basically provides people with a map. You just follow the map.
So you could do a before and an after. Do you ever
Sure.
do comparative analysis?
Sure, sure. More often, mind mirror practitioners will have someone hooked up for the whole session. So instead of listening to a row exercise with gamma beats, there would just be a music with no beat frequencies that would be unstructured, playing in the background, and we would, as practitioners, read out a meditation script to them to create the resonance between us and the client. And depending on what they wanted to achieve, we would guide them into a self-discovery, healing, or transformation meditation, where the structures in the meditations quiet the beta, teach them.
So you tailor it. In other words, it guides you in tailoring what they need.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And the act of centering yourself in your own subconscious essential being to do that work is what conditions the patterns we just saw in the both of you. So ultimately, we want to see people have that pattern so stabilized that when they open their eyes, that's the same pattern. So you take meditation into waking life. And we've been doing this work for 50 years, since Max Cade's time, since the development.
Have you ever done it on somebody who did ayahuasca or a psychedelic drug?
Yes, and they have fabulous brainwave patterns. You really see unity.
It's uniquely different.
Yeah, evolved mind unity. And then I've tested people on marijuana too, and they have far more alpha and far more theta. So their connection to themselves through that enhanced alpha bridge is why they smoke pot in the first place, to be able to get that. But the truth is, you don't need any of that stuff. You just need to understand what arranges, orchestrates your brain waves in such a way that you can have those experiences of your own volition.
You know, it's interesting that the research at ions that we profile they were using not the mind mirror, but EEG to look at precognition events where somebody wearing an EEG cap would then be shown imagery, random imagery, to try to see if the brain was actually anticipating the event before it happened. I think it's fascinating. I know there was work done at Cornell on that same topic, and to go to ions and witness that. This film, a lot of what we're sharing is so cutting edge type of research that is asking the questions, perhaps not giving the answers, but we're showing scientists that are brave enough to begin exploring these questions. It's fascinating.
It is. And I think that a too well kept secret is that the subconscious mind processes information literally 2 million times faster than the conscious mind. So this is why you have this precognition, and we would see that as a big flare in delta, where the personal unconscious mind connects with the collective unconscious, the field itself. We could also see something like that in gamma, because gamma's much faster processing. But if you think about dreaming, I used to wonder, how can my dreams be so incredibly brilliant? If I could write a play like that, I could win Oscars. It's just brilliant. The symbolism is so complex and meaningful. Every single event has meaning. Every button on someone's shirt has validity. There, it all means something. How could my sleeping mind possibly come up with all of that? Well, that's because it's creating at quantum speeds. It's operating at quantum speeds to arrange this mirror of my mind so I can see it and then work with the issues or the precognition it comes up with. It's fascinating stuff. So you mentioned earlier that you're going to go back and do series or mini-series or something. So can you say something about that? What's next?
One thing I'll add, and Bob can answer that, is that we ran out of time in a feature documentary to cover all of the material that we had collected. Because we initially intended to cover some of these topic areas, we decided that we are going to do another film that continues with this series. So that's one reason. And then we have lots of other things that I'll let Bob talk about that we want to cover as well.
Wonderful.
We have so much film that you can make a few documentaries out of what we have, supplementing maybe with a few, some others, but we have most of the information available that can fit right into a documentary. With Dave's professionalism, he can create a wonderful documentary based on anecdotal reports of, say, near-death experiences, which is where we may go in the next film. And that's something for us to discuss in greater detail, as well as energy medicine too. But we have a great deal of information from experiencers, especially from the International Association for Near-Death Studies. When we went there to interview Bruce Grayson and Jeff Mishlove, Jeff Long, there were many experiences there, of course, many people attending the conference on near-death experiences. So we had the opportunity, fortunately, to get some heavy-duty experiencers with NDEs that made for a tremendous play and for inclusion in the film, because it's so darn interesting, really. And I can go into detail, and we don't have enough time, about veridical perceptions or verifiable perceptions that people are claiming to have, where there's an independent corroboration by a third party of the information that they experienced during their NDE, and corroborated again by another party saying that this person who had an NDE, there's no way that person could have received information given the comatose near brain death state, yet the person is able to retrieve accurate information despite space and time as impeding factors. And that's the jewel of the nuggets of research in near-death studies, as far as I'm concerned. That's more convincing than anything else.
Was this precognitive information or the kind of thing where they rose up and saw numbers on a shelf?
Let me give you a quick example. It'll take about 5 minutes, hopefully less. I'd be quick. Bruce Grayson told us a story. Dave was interviewing him at the time. He had a patient named Jack, and Jack was admitted because of respiratory arrests, and he had an NDE while he's had a respiratory arrest. And his main nurse, Anita, told him, listen, Jack, I got to go away for the weekend, but I'm going to have another nurse take care of you. He's very accomplished. Don't worry. While she's away over the weekend, he has another respiratory event and has another NDE. During that NDE, believe it or not, he sees Anita, his nurse, in his NDE. And he says, Anita, what are you doing here? And Anita says to Jack, I want you to go back and tell my parents I love them very much and that I'm sorry I wrecked their red MGB. Now, this was back in the 70s in South Africa, and there weren't many red MGBs on the road. Jack acknowledged that, and he told the first nurse who saw him about his NDE. And when he said that he saw Anita, she ran out of the room in tears. Jack couldn't understand why. The nurse got so upset when he said he saw Anita in his NDE, only later to find out that she did take the weekend off to celebrate her 21st birthday and was given a red MGB car as a present by her parents. She got so excited, she jumped into it, took her for a test drive, crashed it into a tree, and died immediately at the same time that he had his NDE. So there's no way that Jack could have known she had died, let alone how she had died. Yet he did. There are many stories like that that neuroscience can't explain. They don't even try. They'll come up with theories as to why we have out-of-body experiences, why we feel peace and love based on endorphins and neurotransmitters, all that mumbo jumbo. It doesn't account. It doesn't touch the vertical perceptions. And there's more than enough convincing vertical perceptions that I'm aware of from well-documented sources, from convincing people to validate the near-death experience. And that is more than anything else the most important evidence that I came across through my work in the documentary.
And Beth Haley points out that Lauren Belg has a book on near-death experiences, and from the intensive care unit, it is definitely convincing. She has a few people who had that sort of vertical information they couldn't have got by any logical means, for sure.
There's a group of healthcare practitioners that are trying to change the way that clinicians deal with reports of NDEs. Lauren and I talked, and we did do an interview about her experiences in her practice in the ICU. And she said that's changing, at least in her hospital, that people, when they do report these experiences, they're taken more seriously and not brushed off, that it was a hallucination. And I think that's a typical response of a doctor to a patient would be to tell them that your brain is on a lot of chemicals in sedation and so on. Most likely you just had a dream or hallucination. But in some of these cases, the memories of the NDEs are even more vivid than everyday life. And the people are absolutely convinced that what they observed was entirely a real event. And as Bob said, in some of these vertical perceptions. It's like they witnessed things that the people in the room saw, and these people could not have possibly seen this. It was the turning point in Dr. Bruce Grayson's belief system as a materialist psychiatrist, where he had these experiences as a intern in the beginning of his career he couldn't explain. And he kept putting these events and these encounters with patients aside, just saying, I don't understand this, but I'm not going to deal with it now. But later on, it completely changed his career, leading to him to become one of the nation's leading researchers in NDE. We have extensive interviews with these people, and so we're hoping that's going to be in the next film.
As you further embark on this journey of creating the series, and who knows, maybe interviewing more people, certainly placing your mind on this subject by field resonance, there is some chance that you yourself will start having these experiences.
Mhm.
You certainly have the brainwaves that are open and receptive to that. So I want to wish you a very expanded journey.
Here, I'll show you a video that, now I'm not going to attribute this to psychic experience, but in the last like few weeks, this has been my house. That's like lights.
What on earth?
Isn't that interesting?
Lights flickering on and off.
Okay, well,
I don't know what that is, but it just goes away by itself.
I just love it. And I really appreciate your being on this program today. Shall I open it up for questions from anyone? We got a few minutes left. Just if you have a question, unmute and ask away.
One of the things that Bruce Grayson said that got my attention, maybe more than anything else, he said, in psychiatry, all the medicine, the psychoanalysis that we can perform can take months, let alone years, to accomplish a desired goal, possibly. Yet, the people who have an NDE are changed automatically overnight in a day, that psychotherapy, medicine, etc., cannot achieve that the positive results that come about in one NDE incident. And to him, that was one of the most incredible things about the near-death experience. And only if physicians could learn how to maybe mimic it without causing any comatose state, we'd be in a much better shape for that.
And that's true also of mystical experiences and Kundalini arousals. Anything that powers up that light within us, that's where the change comes, that expansion of consciousness. When the Monroe gamma beats, people have unbelievable experiences during those exercises, and they do change us because the brain sees, oh, this is the way it can be. The body says, oh, I never knew this before, and then they want to go back.
Yeah.
And people are going to come back to you. We're getting chat messages that they're looking forward to watching Consciousness Connection and your follow-ups. And I hope you'll let us know when they're going to be there. We'd love to have you back. And if there's any way that the Mind Mirror community can serve you as you have so kindly served us, we would be most happy to return that.
I just put a link in the chat for everyone, if just with the consciousness.media. That is an easy way to remember where you can go, and it just has a link to the film on both platforms.
Beautiful.
And we're going to be at Monroe Institute, I believe, April 17th, Friday, we're going to be showing the film to a group at the Monroe Institute. And I'm looking very much forward to that.
I know it's a gala. Jason King has been preparing for it, and they're all very excited about it, honoring you as you honor them. Thank you.
A good 1/4 of the film is devoted to the Monroe Institute,
Yes.
which you are a part.
Yes, indeed.
So I hope they approve, and I think they will.
I am quite sure that they're all walking on clouds. Thank you, Bob and Dave, for sharing your time and your stories, your hopes and your dreams, and also your intentions for this paradigm shift that can benefit humanity
Thank you.
and
You.
the rest of the seeing world as well. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope to see you again.
Thank you, Judith. It's
Thank you, Judith.
Thank
an absolute
you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.